Thank you so much, ladies. I am so grateful to be recognized today by the Association for Women in Communications. However, I have to confess, I don't feel much like a courageous communicator. And it's not because I lost my voice yesterday and now I sound like a baby seal. Awful timing. It's because I do this work at a fraction of the risk for twice the credit as women of color. And that is simply not fair. I'm occupying this space today instead of women in our community who have been working far longer and much harder than I will ever know, but who, because they continue to be marginalized, are rarely recognized and credited for their work. Because of the concerns I have about proper credit, I thought that I shouldn't accept this award. But then I asked myself the same question I always ask when deciding whether or not to consume the spotlight. Will it give me the opportunity to speak to people who have power, influence, and resources, and who, by hearing my words, may be compelled to join me in working for a more equitable and just society? She is. Thank you. In this case, then, the answer was obviously yes. So here I am, and thank you so much for having me today. So let me get right to the point, because my time is limited. My goal in being here today is not to just accept this lovely honor, but to compel you to do more than you're currently doing for a more fair and just society. So let's get started. Who's a little scared? Okay, the truth is, I'm speaking to some of you more than others. And given my introduction, you may already know who you are. We're gonna play a little game right now called, Are You Talking to Me? Because often when I speak about these things, folks are like, hey, since I don't say racist things or do racist things, I'm not part of the problem, but I do know the folks she's talking about. You know, you're thinking about your uncle or your friend or your coworker. Let's see if I'm talking to you. I am talking to you if your ancestors immigrated to the United States when immigration was only allowed for white Europeans. I'm talking to you if over the years your ancestors received training and salaries in jobs where white employees had rights that people of color did not. I'm talking to you if, after serving in the military, someone in your family benefited from Federal Housing Administration or Veterans Association loans. And for folks who don't know, the FHA and VA financed more than $120 billion in new housing between 1934 and 1962, during which time covenants specified that only 2% of this real estate be made available to people of color. I'm talking to you if you live in a neighborhood where people of color were ever prevented from living or buying property, either through discriminatory lending practices or various forms of legal and illegal intimidation. If you live in a predominantly white neighborhood, it is safe to assume that I'm talking to you, because none of these things happened by accident. I'm talking to you if your parents and grandparents were able to vote for people who represented their interests without worrying about polling taxes, literacy requirements, inaccessible polling locations and hours, or other forms of discrimination. Raise your hand if I'm talking to you. Okay. Thank you. This timeline of events from which we directly benefit, and these are just the tip of the iceberg, by the way, have left us going about our daily business in a country where the average Latinx American has 1/10 of the net worth of the average white American, and the average Black American has 1/13 the net worth of their white peers. We live in a country where Black students are 6 times more likely than white students to attend a high-poverty school, where white applicants with the exact same resumes as their Black counterparts are hired at double the rate. In fact, a white man with a criminal history is more likely to be hired than a Black man with no criminal past. We live in a country where even after controlling for all variables, including credit score, Latinx Americans are 78% more likely to be given a high-cost mortgage than a white American. And Black Americans are 105% more likely. It's not just housing either. It's every financial aspect of our lives. Did you know that large auto lenders have paid more than $200 million since 2013 to settle lawsuits for specifically charging Black and brown customers higher rates? And did you know that this problem is not getting better like some people think it is? In fact, it is getting worse. The wage gap between Black and white workers has been slowly increasing since 1979. And if you're tempted to believe that Santa Barbara is a liberal utopia that is somehow exempt from systemic racism, first of all, look around you. And secondly, keep in mind that 50% of Americans say racism isn't a problem in their own community. And know this, in a recent study on the Santa Barbara Unified School District, after controlling for the type of discipline incident, Black students were 1.8 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. That's almost twice as likely. And Latinx students were 1.3 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers for the same type of incident. When we know that suspensions and expulsions are unequivocally linked, and I quote this from the research, to poorer developmental outcomes for adolescents, including lower academic achievement, dropout, and increased behavioral problems both in school and at home. Some of you may have heard this phenomenon referred to as the school-to-prison pipeline. And still, based on polls, less than half of all Americans believe that racism is a major societal problem. What are we doing? But it's really not about what we believe, is it? It's really about what we do. And what do we tend to do? Well, we easily forget the timeline of events that has, for over 400 years, stacked the deck in the favor of white Americans and allowed us all to be where we are right now. We convince ourselves that anyone could be here with us if they just worked hard enough like we do. We refuse to acknowledge the data that show racism as a sociological fact that shapes life outcomes. And when we find ourselves in places where the majority of people look like us, whether it be our neighborhoods, events like this one, or at the decision-making table, we rarely ask ourselves, how did it come to be that so few people of color are present right now? And what can we do about it? So, by the looks on your faces, I can tell that I might be making you a little bit uncomfortable. Oh my gosh. It's a miracle if you like me anyway. It's good that you're uncomfortable. Your discomfort right now is a measure of your humanity. I am uncomfortable. We should all be uncomfortable with these facts. I even hope you're kind of angry. As long as your anger is directed at the problem and not the person speaking openly about the problem, whether that is me or whether that is my comrades from Black Lives Matter. And maybe you do get it. You do get it. You are angry at the problem. But I hear folks express outrage about the problem all the time. You can't exist without a daily conversation about it. And again, I say, the question is not about what you feel, but it's about what you do. So as I said earlier, I jump at the chance to speak to an audience full of successful people because together we have the resources to make the future look different than the past. I'm going to give you some ideas. Does anybody want some ideas? Okay. And I'm sure you have ideas to share with me as well, and I would love to hear those later. If you're a member of the Association for Women in Communication, here are just a few resources you have. You have skills, mad skills. The handout I'll leave on your table, which you can see, it looks just like this. It includes a website where you can enroll to offer pro bono skills and services to organizations working toward equity and justice. Consider doing this as often as you are able. And I know many people aren't able to do it very often, but let's be honest. All of us could offer our skills and services for free at least once a year, if not twice. You also have this, organizational leverage. If you are in any position of power, which I would argue all of us are in some form, take a close look around the decision-making table where you sit. Ask yourself, who is missing and what can we do about it? A lot of the work I do at Santa Barbara City College is about doing exactly this, along with many of my colleagues here at this table. You have an audience, a very powerful thing. How could you use your platform or your voice to spread information to folks in your circles of influence, just like I'm doing right now? Whatever area of communications you're in, select a racial justice angle or issue for your next project. I dare you. Since I'm almost out of time, I brought that handout I referred to because after all, I'm an educator and I couldn't speak to anybody without bringing handouts to take home and a little homework to assign. It lists a few really important things that everyone in this room can do, even if you're not a member of the association and you don't work in the communications field. You see, there is something that every single person can do. Sometimes the task of openly addressing our history and ensuring a different future feels daunting. And so we're really tempted to ignore our role and let other people handle it. But who? If not you, then who? If you do feel overwhelmed by my words today, I encourage you to consider this well-known Jewish saying that keeps me motivated all the time. When it comes to making social change, you are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you excused from it. I hope today that I have compelled you to share this task with me. Thank you.